Today I'm going to be speaking about management strategies for the new teacher. The webinar is entitled Starting Off Strong, Intentional Management Practices for the New Teacher. And we're going to be talking about developing a vision for classroom management. My name is Laura Chantimorena, and I'm a professor at Brooklyn College and the bilingual program head, and formerly a dual language bilingual teacher in East New York, Brooklyn, and a mentor to new teachers. So why is management so important? Really, management allows everything else in the classroom to happen, because with management, kids are happier and more eager to learn, enthusiastic, willing to work harder. More time is spent in instruction. As a classroom teacher myself, I know when I spent a lot of time on managing kids who are not doing what they were supposed to be doing, I spent a lot of less time in instruction. So classrooms in which the management is tight, kids are learning more. Students learn content and social skills. So again, students are spending more time on tasks, but also they're learning what it means to act in a group, what it means to be a positive force in a group. And I think that's really important, a life skill. And teachers feel more successful and maybe less worn out. And again, I'm speaking from my own experience, when classroom management takes such a toll, an emotional toll on your day-to-day classroom life, teachers begin to feel discouraged, unhappy, and really tired. So having a positive and clear idea of what you want for classroom management is both important and helpful for students, but also for the teacher. In effect, it creates a healthy environment for everyone where learning can happen. So let's start with your vision. More than my ideas about classroom management are about developing a vision and then developing practices that match that vision, rather than just imposing rules. Because once you impose rules, it doesn't guarantee that everyone is going to follow them. Children are unique individuals, so having a vision helps you match what you want to the children you have. So the first step is really thinking about, how do you imagine your classroom sounds? Do you imagine that it's a classroom where there's a buzz of activity? Do you imagine it being very quiet? And when do you imagine these kind of sounds happening? And once you have that vision for yourself, it's important to be able to transmit that to students. How do you imagine your classroom looks? Where do you imagine the desk? What do you imagine about the setup of the desk? Where do you imagine having a rug? Where is the library? All those things are really important in thinking about how the kids live and embody that classroom. How do you imagine your role as a teacher? Here I have an old man teaching, reflecting a traditional idea of teaching. Do you imagine yourself as a lecturer in front of students, or do you imagine yourself sitting in a group? Or do you imagine yourself within a spectrum of those two opposites? And then how do you then enact that in the classroom? And lastly, how much choice do you imagine your students having and when? Do you imagine them getting up out of their seats anytime they want to? Do you imagine them contributing? How do you imagine that to happen, and when? So now I'm going to walk you through thinking about the first couple of weeks. The first couple of weeks are truly different for all teachers, including new teachers. I know that as a new teacher and as a mentor to new teachers, lots of teachers want to start off by being rigorous and teaching lots of content. But unless we establish what kind of learning community we are at the very beginning, those types of opportunities for strong teaching may be lost. So I think it's important at the very beginning to focus your teaching on what's expected and the tone of your classroom. What I mean by this is, when we move into Writer's Workshop, how are you sitting at Writer's Workshop? How do you get your paper? How do you get your pencil? What happens if your pencil point breaks? And how is this done? In what ways do people speak to each other? What is the appropriate procedure? All of this is truly important in order for those core concepts in your class to be taught. Teaching management expectation is prioritized over content, or they're done together. So in the first couple of weeks of school, even though I am teaching writing, I'm constantly reviewing the routine. When we do writing, this is how it sounds. When we do writing, the table monitors get the pencils. When a pencil breaks, I'm doing that all the time. And I'm noticing when kids do the right thing. Oh, I'm so happy that Malik, his pencil broke, and what he was able to do was raise his hand and quickly go over to wherever and get a new pencil without interrupting anyone, and highlighting those kind of victories so that the whole community values them. Students need to know routines in order for instruction to be maximized. This is a point that I made earlier. Once kids do things and it becomes seamless and it takes a matter of seconds rather than minutes and with interruptions, then everyone is learning quickly and in a peaceful way. So I'm going to give you an example. And this example is taken from a very great book called The First 6 Weeks of School. And they talk about how important it is to set up the expectations for basic routines of the school day, and that this is done with close teacher supervision and reinforcement. So they list a whole bunch of different times for teachers that are important for teachers and students, including arrival, lining up, bathroom, lunch, signal, dismissal, cleanup, but there are many more times during the day. And it's important as a new teacher, if you haven't already done so, to sit down and even write down what you expect for each time of this day. And I'm going to walk you through that. So, for example, arrival. Let's think about how that happens. The first thing to think about is, do all students arrive at the same time, or are they staggered? So I've been working in schools that have both. So for example, if kids come in staggered, like their parents drop them off at your classroom instead of at the cafeteria, do you have centers set up? Do you have activities set up so they quickly go to their desk and they start working on something? Or do you pick them up at the cafeteria because they've had breakfast? And if they do, how do you line them up? What kinds of things do you say? How do you review the expectations of walking up the stairs or walking down the hall? How do you make sure that everybody's ready? Because they've probably taken out their coats and their book bags. Think about, how do you get everyone centered? Another thing to think about is, where and how do you want students to hang up their coats? I know that this doesn't have very much at all to do with instruction, but again, creating a seamless way where students transition from one place to the other is critical, because this is a time when, you know, especially if you have young kids, it could be a mess, where kids are dropping their coats, they're stepping on other people's coats, they're tripping, and what could happen is a lot of conflict, and then they bring that conflict into the class, and it really hinders what you're able to do with them. So how do you make sure that kids don't crowd the closets? Maybe you want to send 5 kids into your classroom at a time. Maybe what you want to do is send half of the class to their desks to take out their homework folders, while the other half is hanging up the coats, and then you have a bell and they switch. You have to think about what works for your space and what works for you, but to think about it really critically, and then guide students and clearly define those expectations and show them through modeling. This is how we do it in our classroom, and this is why. What should they do when they're at their desk? Should they take out their homework, or should they start reading? What is going to set the tone that you want in your classroom? And how do you help them know what they're doing? Again, through modeling, doing it yourself, asking them, look, I did this. What do you think? What did I do to make it successful? Doing what I call the play-by-play, by recognizing what others are doing. Look at what Simon did. What are some things that he did during arriving to our classroom that were so helpful, or even saying that to everyone. Look, Simon was so quick, he hung up his coat, he hung up his coat, he put up his school bag, and then he quickly sat down, valuing how students are acting within the classroom. And how do you help them know what they should do? Again, we talked about this through modeling. So One other thing that's really critical is thinking about how you communicate with students. I think it's really important to be aware of language, making sure that the language that you use is positive and encouraging for students. It's important that we speak to students with respect. I know that sometimes teachers can become very stressed because there's so many things to do and so many different types of things to do at the same time. And sometimes we can be disrespectful in a slight way, like, why did you do that? Instead of saying, in our class, it's important that we don't throw things. Throwing things is not okay, which is a little bit more removed. We have to provide information to students. So again, with that example, why did you throw that? Instead, we provide information by saying, throwing things is dangerous. When we throw things, that's dangerous. We can't have dangerous situations in our classroom. So we're giving them information because sometimes kids actually don't know, or they do things, and it might seem weird that they don't know, but maybe in their house it's okay to throw something, and they're an only child, but within a group where there are kids who are so close to each other, those things might be dangerous, for example. Offer alternatives. So for example, if they say, if you're angry, you can go sit and read a book, or you can color, for example, rather than saying, you know, stop yelling, you have to stop that, without giving them any alternatives of what can help them cool down. Help spell out the situation for some students. And during the webinar, I gave an example of my son. Sometimes when he sees people that he wants to be friends with, he'll just run over to them and, you know, grab them. And he's 3.5. But I think it's important that some students don't understand appropriate ways to interact with others. So helping spell out the situation, for example. Sometimes when you walk over to someone and hit them, they may get scared and not understand that you want to play with them. Tell, don't ask. So in certain situations, teachers may ask students to do something like, can you take off your coat? Which students interpret as a question. Teachers say, yes, or no, I don't want to take it off. But if you want something to happen, you have to tell students to do it. For example, in our classroom, we need to take off our school bags. Please put your school bag in the closet. And using positive language. It's important to be positive with students because it helps build their self-esteem. And we have to acknowledge feelings. Students come in with lots of feelings and they're difficult to manage. So I know you're feeling angry and that's really awful, but even though we feel angry, everyone has to follow the rules. What are some things that we can do to help you feel a little bit better? Do you want to go read? Do you want to do this? And offering alternatives that suit that student. And use other supports to get your message across. I think it's important to use signals in the classroom, for example, a rain stick, or a pat on the back to say that you remember the conversation that you had with the student before. So it's important to use language with individuals. For example, if a student is making noise during independent reading time, what do? You can remind student of the rules. Reading time is quiet so others can focus. You can ask a student to pick a book, but it's taking too long, so what do? You can use time limits. I'm going to count to 3, and if you do not choose a book in that time, I will choose it for you. Or one student is calling out, you may say, I know how excited you are to tell the answer, but everyone needs to raise their hand. So these are some examples of the principles that I spoke about in terms of communicating with students. How do you use language with groups that in a successful way? One is through using signals. 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, and everyone needs to repeat that at the same time, or claps, or rain sticks, or self-reflection. Our library is messy. What are some things we can do to keep it organized so kids all contribute to that discussion? And remembering that students often need help with multiple step tasks, so giving kids 1 or 2 steps at a time. When you're at your desk, you're going to take out your math workbook and open to page 5, and then giving them the remaining tasks. I wanted to talk for a second about clear expectations. I had talked a little bit about how does your classroom sound like. I think that it's important to have references like this. This is a noise clock where you can discuss with students. For example, the pin represents a pin drop. During reading, it's super quiet. It's like this, a pin drop. So teachers can use this as a reference point to talk about what is the appropriate noise level in their classroom. So now what I'd like to do is I'm going to share my desktop and share a video where a teacher is working on all of the skills that I've talked about today.
And you said what to do. I work hard every day. I learn in many ways. I have a background of being a fine arts dance major. Working with choreography and moving people's bodies through a certain series or steps in a dance has been beneficial to me in the classroom because I pretty much choreograph my day. I really think about the flow of them to the carpet, back to their desk, now in groups, now separated. Your body and circle spots. Try to choreograph it so that it's smooth and that there's a natural flow, which cuts out on a lot of side talk when you're switching from one activity to the next. Wow. But even if you don't have a background in dance, you can really focus on the flow of your classroom because we all drive and we know what it's like to weave in and out of traffic. You have to think about the pathways in your classroom. I literally will tell students, this is your aisle. When you come to the carpet, you're going to go down this aisle. And when you come to the carpet from this side, you're going to go down this aisle so that there is not congestion. On 3, you may walk over to get the station. Another thing that helps with flow when you're standing up and leaving the carpet, we all stand up at the same time, and nobody starts walking till everybody's standing up. So once everybody's standing up, then they get the signal to walk. That way nobody is stepped on. We practice our routines, we practice our transitions. We have long conversations about what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like when you go from your desk to the carpet. And it's worth the investment up front because later it allows you to spend more time actually learning.
So this video was a great example of a teacher who's been extremely intentional on linking to her strengths how she understands how the classroom is put together and communicating that to students and thinking of the minutiae. What happens at different times? How do children stand up after a lesson or coming to the rug? And I think that if teachers can spend some time thinking about this, and especially along with other colleagues in their building or teachers who've been working for longer periods of time, then new teachers can start working out the kinks and put it all together in order to have an effective classroom where students are happy and teachers are happy and everyone is learning. So thank you so much for listening to my webinar, and there's more resources on the web. Thank you.